Alrighty, welcome back everyone. It's your main math man, Mr. Shank, coming to you live from Summit Academy. In this video, working on that Capstone question practice, that C1PI2. And so, talking about a system of equations for this. And so, let's read through the problem and see what we can come up with. So, it says a group of 202 people went on an overnight camping trip, taking 60 tents with them. Some of the tents held 2 people each, and the rest held 4 people each. All the tents were filled to capacity, and everyone got to sleep in a tent. So no one had to, sleep outside of a tent. So that means everyone was able to get in there. And it says for part A, write a system of equations to model the situation. And when we say system, we're talking about two or more equations on the same graph, and that's what we're going to have for this one. So we'll have this here in a second. So what we first need to do is, let's say step 1, we're going to say let's define our 2 variables, because we're going to have to come up with 2 variables because we need to be able to graph it out. And we need to x and a y. So let's say for our 2 variables, let's say, okay, well, in our problem, it talks about what kind of tents they have. So let's do that. So let's let x equal the 2-person tent. Let's say 2-person tent. And let's say y equals the 4-person tent, because that way it will have our 2 variables for our system. Now we can have, we need to write our 2 equations using these variables. So let's say step 2 is write equation using variables. And so if we read over our problem, it says a group of 202 people stay overnight camping trip, and it says taking 60 total tents. So that means the combined tents is going to be 60. So one of these equations, let's do it in pink, so that way it's a little bit easier to say. Let's say for one of these equations, it's going to be x plus y is equal to 60, because we're saying, hey, the total number of tents are going to be the x tents for the 2-person and the y tents for a 4-person are going to be total up to be 60. We'll come up with what that solution is going to be here in a second. But then we say, okay, well, how many people are we talking about? Well, there's 2 people for every 2-person tent, and there's 4 people for every 4-person tent. And we're saying that has to be equal to the number of people, which is going to be 202. So this is going to be our system of equations for this problem. So what we're going to do is I'm going to say step 3 is graph on Desmos, because that's our favorite thing to do, because that way it's a little bit easier to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and pull up our picture. And what we can do is, if we let me actually back up here a second. If we look at our problem, so let me go to the next part. It says in part B, solve the system by graphing, which is what we'll do, and we'll label that solution here in a second. So use that picture that they give, and if you notice how it has the x-axis already graphed out for us, and it goes from 0 to 100. It has the number of 2-person tents, and then it goes from 0 to 100 on the y-axis. And so what I suggest you do is match your graph to given picture, let's say. What I mean by that is we can change the axes, or change the axis. So let me pull up my calculator again so I can show you what I'm talking about. So we know for our, you can hit that reverse contrast if you want your picture to look like that. But what we're going to say is let's label our x-axis as number of two person tenths. And we're going to say it goes from 0 to 100, and it counts by, so where it says step, you want to put 10 because it counts by tens. And then similar idea for the y-axis, we're going to say number of four person tenths. And we are talking about going from 0 to 100, and it's also counting by 10. So what you can do is you can have your picture, and again, click in the little wrench or your graph settings, but I can kind of zoom out a little bit, that way it kind of looks like that. So again, don't zoom out too far because that will mess with your lines, but that way at least you have your full picture. Again, you want to try to match your picture with what you're given. So now what we can do is let's graph out our system. So I type in my two equations exactly as they look. I said we have x plus y equals 60, so that was one line, and our second line was 2x plus 4y equals 202. So notice that it graphs out two different lines, and right away what you're looking for is where they intersect. So let me click on this point, and it says 19, 41. And so this is the solution point that we're looking for. So let me graph that out. Let me say 19, 41. I'm going to click label, and I'm going to say, hey, we need to label what this is. So we're going to say this is our solution point. We change it to, change the color. Let's say white. It'll make it a little bit easier to see. So let's say a solution point, and that is our point of intersection, meaning where they cross, touch, meet, or they intersect. Okay, so there's our picture, and this is what we need. So we're going to say, hey, here's our point, meaning here's our solution for our system. What we have to do is we need to be able to graph it out. So what I would suggest doing is let's look at one of these lines at a time. Let me actually unclick that label. So what you can do is you can click on these, color parts, so that way you can highlight and show what you would need. So let's graph out on our paper what we need to do. So I'm going to graph out the line x plus y. Notice where it hits the x-axis at, and let's say the y-axis and where the x-axis is. So it goes through the points 0, 60 and 60, 0. So what I can do is let's pull up our paper and see what the graph looks like. So let me close this, and then I'm going to say on our paper, what I can do is I can kind of graph out. So I'm going to say, all right, one of our lines, I'll do let's do blue and red, or was it blue and orange, green and orange, one of those two. Let's do blue and orange. So it says it went through 60 on the y-axis, and it went through 60 on the x-axis. And what I can do is I'm going to draw that line to connect it. So let's draw that nice straight line. Again, I suggest you use a ruler. That way it's a little bit easier to see. So let me say that actually, use ruler to draw lines. So again, I graphed out my x-axis and my y-axis points. And let's go back to our picture. So I'm going to say, okay, our picture, let's talk about the other graph. So let's unhighlight those 2 points. And we said, here's our other line in orange. Notice where it goes through here. So it goes through 0, 50.5, and it goes through 101. So those are going to be the 2 points that I use to kind of graph out our other line. I can say, okay, let me pull up what our 2 points are. So let's say in orange, get this out here. Let me find, and that's going to be just above 50 and just past, let's say just past 100. It doesn't have to be perfect, but what we're trying to demonstrate and show is what it will look like on our picture. And so connect those two. Let me try that again. Let's do like here. There we go. And to here. Something like that. There we go. And so notice how it has this point here, And now what we need to do is we need to say that solution point. So we said our solution point is again where they intersect. So let's call it right here. Again, let's label what that point was. It was 19, 41. And again, that kind of matches up. Again, it's 19 on our x, and on our y, it is 41. So let's label that as our solution point. And we called that, again, the point of intersection. So wherever they cross, touch, meet, that's what we're looking for. So now that we have our graph, we have our solution point, let's come up with what we're going to do for the next part. So in part C, it says solve the system of equations algebraically, and let's show all of our work. And so again, here's our system. We had x plus y equals 60, and then we had 2x plus 4y equals 202. So there's a couple different ways that you can solve this. So you can do either elimination, substitution, whatever you want to do. I'm going to show you at least elimination, since the part E has substitution involving it. So what we can do is we're going to multiply one of these by a number, so that way we cancel out the x's or we cancel out the y. So what I can do is I can actually do in yellow here. I'm going to multiply this first one by -2, because that way it will cancel out the x's. So my new equation, or my new inequality, my new equations are going to be like this. Let me move this over a little bit. Let's say something like this. I'm going to have -2x minus 2y equals -120. And then the second equation stays the same. So it's still 2x, make sure you get rid of that. Still 2x plus 4y equals 202. And so what you do is you add the columns together. So I'm going to say, let's add these together. And so I add the columns together, this becomes 0. And then this is either going to be 2y, and then this is going to be equal to, let's say, 82. Because what we have to do is we use elimination to kind of figure out what one of these variables is going to be, and then we're going to substitute back in. So what I'm going to do, use inverse operation to get y by itself. So I divide both sides by 2, and I say, okay, hey, y equals 41, which we already knew. But what we're going to do now is we're going to substitute this back into our original equation. So what I can do is I can take, let's say, check, make sure that still is good. Okay. What we can do is I'm going to say, let's take this back and let's sub this into our first equation. So substitute into original equation. So I'm going to say, all right, in our original equation, we had x plus, and now instead of y, I now have 41 equals 60. So this is really easy to solve, because all we have to do is subtract 41 from both sides and get our x value. So we're going to say x equals 19, which is what we had. And so put these together, we're going to say our solution point. Solution point is going to be still that same point that we had. We said 19, 41. A little bit better. There we go. All right, and then in part D, it says explain the solution to the system of equations in terms of the context provided. Meaning, what is it? How many of each type of tent were taken on the trip? So a way we could write this, a couple different ways you can write this, but what we're going to say is this. We're going to say the group had 19 two-person tents, and 41 four-person tents on their overnight camping. Better camping trip. So a couple different ways you can do that, but again, you're just trying to summarize what that solution point 19, 41 means in context of your original problem. So you're just saying, what does the 19 stand for? What does the 41 stand for in that situation? And then lastly, for the part E, we're going to say this. It says Abigail decides to use the substitution method to eliminate the x terms in order to solve for y. Abigail uses the following steps. So it gives these steps, and then it says, do you agree or disagree with Abigail's solution? If you agree, solve the system of equations in another way to demonstrate the same answer. And then if you disagree, identify where Abigail made a mistake, correct the mistake, and continue the solution process. So let's see what we look like. What I would suggest doing is let's graph out, let's say graph out system first, because that way we can get our answer, and that way we can check, to see if this answer is correct or not. So let's pull up our Desmos calculator. Looks something like this. We're going to say, okay, let me reset what it's going to be. So I'm going to say, let me hit that home button, clear some of these out. And let's say, okay, so we have our first equation is given, so it has 5x minus 3y equals 42. And then it has 2x minus y, say 2x minus y equals 10. Graph those two out. Let's find where that solution point is. We have our two lines. Again, kind of move your graph around, find where they're equal. And so notice how it has a point that is different from what Abigail found. So what we're going to have to do is if we say, here's our solution point, we need to find a different way. So we're going to say, okay, let me pull this graph out. This is negative 12 comma negative 34. I'll write that down real quick. So let's say solution at, and we said solution at negative 12 comma negative 34, which is different from what they had here. So we need to find where the mistake originally happened. Negative 12, negative 34. Double check one more time. Okay. So let's kind of find where the mistake is. So let's see. All right, step one, they took and got y by itself, so that way they could substitute it in. So they subtracted negative 2x from both sides, and they flipped signs, so that looks good. In step two, they substituted it in, so they have 2x minus 10y, 2x minus 10 instead of y. So all they did was they plugged it into that original equation. So, and let me actually write what that original equations are. So it was 5x. So, all right, so let's write out this original system. So it has 5x minus 3y equals 42. So it's supposed to be up here at the top of the page, but that's okay as long as we know what we're talking about. And another equation is 2x minus y equals 10. Okay, so what they did was they solved for y and they plugged it in here. So if we look at the step 2, they plugged it in. Instead of y, it's 2x minus 10. And so now what they did for step 3 is they distributed the negative 3 to each of the terms here. And that's where the mistake is going to be, is in this step 3. So we're going to say this step 3 is incorrect, and it's because it should be a positive 30, because when you do negative 3 times negative 10, it should be positive 30. So let's see what it has. So we should say, let's do this. Let's say step 3 is incorrect because they multiplied incorrectly. And let's show our work for what it should be. So I'm going to take it from this step 3 right here. So I'm going to say it's going to be 5x minus 6x, and it should be, like I said, plus 30, and then we're going to say equals 42. So the rest of it we can kind of solve for ourselves. So let's find out what we have. So this is going to be combined like terms. It's going to be negative x, and we say plus 30 equals 42. And then we can say, let's subtract what we had. Say minus 30 to both sides. And again, we already know what our solution should be. So we know that we're trying to get this answer here. So we're trying to work towards it. So I'm going to say this is going to be negative x equals 12. We're going to say positive x is equal to negative 12. And so that gives us one of our answers that we're looking for. And so now what we can do is similar to what we did in the part C of our problem, we can sub in this value into our original equation. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take and I'm going to sub this into this equation right here. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to say, okay, instead of 2 times x, I'm going to have 2 times negative 12. So I'm going to say, let's say, like I said before, say sub into original equation. So I'm going to say I have 2 times, instead of x, I have negative 12, and I have minus y equals 10. So I'm now trying to figure out what our y value is. So this is going to be negative 24 minus y equals 10. And so I can add, let's use those inverse operations, add 24 to both sides. I'm going to say I have negative y equals 34. And that means that, flip the signs around, y equals negative 34. So there's our answer, and we're going to say our solution point, solution point should be at point negative 12, comma, negative 34, which is what we found originally when we graphed. So make sure you can see how I use those steps. Again, I use kind of all 3 methods in this problem to be able to come up with a solution. Again, we said that we disagree because we identified a mistake in step 3. And we figured out what the solution should be by graphing, but also using that method of substitution to find what our variables would actually be. So make sure to ask questions as they come up. Be sure to graph out using Desmos, and as always, super slam that subscribe button.